Authentic Parenting, a podcast about personal development in the context of parenting, where I explore how you can find more calm, connection, and joy in parenting through the process of self-discovery and inner growth with a trauma-informed lens. Today, cognitive skills and why they matter. Recently, I learned some staggering statistic. The pandemic, it turns out, set students back 2 years and exacerbated learning challenges. Every parent of a school-age child knows students are struggling. 70% of students aren't performing sufficiently at grade level. The National Center for Educational Statistics reports that reading and math scores for fourth graders in 2022, following the pandemic, dropped to levels not seen in 2 decades, with the greatest decline in students with IEPs, individualized education plans. Students who were already struggling and were even further behind than the average. My guest today is Betsy Hill. She's the mother of 3 boys and an award-winning educator. She studied the neuroscience of learning with Dr. Patricia Wolfe and other pioneers in the field, coining the term neuroeducator. She's the former chair of the Board of Trustees at Chicago State University and teaches strategic thinking at Lake Forest Graduate School of Management, where she received a Contribution to Learning Excellence Award. She received a NEPRIS Trailblazer Award for sharing her knowledge, skills, and passion for the neuroscience of learning in classrooms around the United States. She holds a Master of Arts in Teaching and an MBA from Northwestern University. Together with Roger Stark, she's the co-author of a brand new book that just came out called Your Child Learns Differently, Now What? The Truth for Parents, the 5-Step Plan. In today's conversation, we discussed why improving your child's cognitive skills is the key to improving learning ability. Brains can change, as we know. Scientists call this neuroplasticity, which means that whatever a child's learning strengths and weaknesses, they can be improved. And building their cognitive skills is the number one factor in improving academic performance. Betsy shared with me that cognitive skills account for 50% of the variance in students' academic performance. That means that half of the difference between one child's academic performance and the child sitting next to them can be predicted by their cognitive skills. Not teachers, not class size, not curriculum or technology. Pretty fascinating. I hope you'll find this conversation useful and feel empowered to help your children. Please enjoy.
They do listen, even though it seems like they don't. And 3 or 4 years or 3 or 4 months or whatever it is down the road, you'll say something and they'll come back to you with something you told them. And it's like, I didn't even think you were listening to me, but they were, and it does sink in. And so, keep having those conversations because it is important and it is relevant. But for a lot of kids, they can't get their work done simply because they can't stay organized, or they have difficulty with certain subjects because they have underlying cognitive weaker areas, and those can be strengthened. And so sometimes even for high achieving, or we did research once with a school district where we helped a lot more kids qualify for the gifted program. So the statistics say, the research says that 50% of academic outcomes are predicted by cognitive skills, more than anything else, more than student-teacher ratio, more than all of those other kinds of things. And so but we haven't dealt with them. We haven't recognized that. And school systems tend not to be familiar with them either. Teachers aren't trained on this.
Wow, I'm surprised, quite frankly, because it's the year of 2023 and there is so much research, brain research, so many breakthroughs in psychology, and we have so much great scientific information, but somehow it hasn't reached the classroom, the regular, ordinary teacher. I speak to early childhood educators at various conferences about trauma-informed learning, teaching, raising children. And it seems like, wow, this is the first time they even hear the word trauma, how trauma can affect children's learning. And they're still using behavioral methods. It's like, wow, when this is going to take effect? It's taking, I thought after the pandemic, the state of learning and education will change rapidly, but it seems like, no, not quite. We're not quite there yet. It seems like we even reverted back to the original state. So
in some cases. Yeah.
Can you talk about the state of education post-pandemic and before the pandemic in terms of like what happened? It seems like our eyes were opened. We saw some real challenges and learned certain things, but are we making changes really in this area?
Yeah, so the pandemic has resulted in a lot of thinking and re-examination and concern because academic progress was so stymied. It's so impaired by, and the national statistics on students' progress from an academic point of view have been really, really concerning. So people are looking at that, but unfortunately, for most educators, their repertoire is, what do I know from education, which is about the science of teaching. And it's about, they missed out on instruction. Therefore, we have to cram more instruction into a time period that, you can only learn so much in any given point of time, except if you understand that cognitive skills are what helps us learn. And when we can build cognitive skills, we can actually be more efficient about learning. We can put more learning into whatever that period of time is. And it can have a huge impact. So we've worked with both our clients that we work with as families, working with their children. We also do work in schools. And what we see is that when children are able to improve their cognitive skills, you see these dramatic jumps in academic performance because they simply know how to learn better. They can learn. So it's the how of learning, not the what. And so when education is able to refocus on the how of learning as opposed to the what, and the assumption that instruction is the answer for everything, then I think that is going to be the tipping point for really the kind of change that needs to take place.
Yeah. Are we getting there? What needs to be done for this to happen? Are there policy changes need to happen? Do the teachers have, for example, or the school district, individual freedoms to emphasize more learning as opposed to instruction-based teaching? Where does the change needs to happen? Or is it on all levels? I don't know.
Yeah, I think the change is on many, many levels because the whole education system has been built on these premises that are not solid and that have sort of, when we started working on this, getting education and neuroscientists to talk was an unusual thing. In some of the training that I've been through, where we worked with neuroscientists and listened to their research, they were amazed that as teachers, we were interested in what they had to say, that they had not connected that. Sometimes the neuroscientists hadn't even connected it to say, well, we don't know exactly how this is going to play out. But there are some basic principles of neuroscience that need to be incorporated in every education environment. The fact that our brains, when they learn, what learning truly is connecting neurons in our brains. We have 85 billion neurons in our brains, and learning is connecting them into networks that we use and reuse to do various things. So every child, every individual builds their own brain that models the world. And so we can't, as parents and teachers, we don't just take a bunch of information and plant it into our kids' brains. It just can't be done. They have to learn it. They have to build it. And when we do that, then we start to say, okay, how can I create a learning experience for my child or for my student that helps them do that, that doesn't just assume that they're going to get whatever it is that I have in my head.
Yeah. And it also has to connect to the previous knowledge that the learner has, right? You can't just learn new information. You have to piece by piece sort of build the knowledge puzzle, or if you will. And that's the best kind of learning. When you know something, then you add something else to that. Currently, I'm learning, for example, as an adult, how to do latte art. I have a new coffee machine. This is simple, but it's truthfully, there's lots of learning components. I can't just, and my daughter wants to do it too, together. So we're learning together. We watched some YouTube videos. They're enlightening, but then when you go to do it in practice, it doesn't work because you don't have the prerequisite skills or the previous skills to build upon. And I can see the difference between me and my daughter. As a young person, she just wants to do it and do it harder to get it right accidentally all of a sudden, right? And for me, I'm like, wait, I need to do this first, then this first. So it happened that for me, it worked. I was able to pour the shape of a heart. And my daughter went, wow, how did you learn that? I said, well, it took me certain weeks to learn the prerequisites, to sort of prime myself to pour in new knowledge, new skills. You can't just out of thin air watch something and assume that you know. And that was the difference between us. And now she wants to follow my path. It's fascinating how we assume in our education system. And I was a classroom teacher myself. I taught many years. You're right. You just want to impart knowledge and lecture people, but it just doesn't work like that.
It has to be built up. And we use these when we do professional development too, even simple things like, okay, we want to talk to a teacher about what the parts of a neuron are. And there are parts of a neuron that are called dendrites. And so dendrite, if I talk to you and I said, well, I really want to tell you, Anna, about dendrites today, your brain is going, I don't even have any context for it. Okay, so the dendrites are the little parts of the neuron that are like a tree. And dendrite comes from the Greek word for tree. So these are like branches, and they're like branches reaching out. So when I can connect that idea to something you already know, then I'm going to be far more effective and it's going to make sense. But if I just tried to teach you about dendrites and you tried to memorize it, which is what unfortunately a lot of schools still is, it isn't meaning. And we didn't evolve as humans to learn meaningless information. So relevance and meaning are absolutely key in everything we teach and do.
And then for relevant information, I think we can just Google and find the answers. But learning is forever. Once you learn, you learned. But once they imparted this information, the teachers, you forget the next day. In fact, my daughter just said the other day that her friend who is taking algebra, whatever, in high school, like a high level math. I said, can she help you with this exercise? She's like, no, she already forgot what she learned last year. I'm like, how can she forget what she learned last year? Isn't like this year's information, previous year's information necessary to learn this year's information? Apparently not, right?
Right. Especially in math. Math tends to be segregated subjects, sort of like silos. And so we learn algebra and then we're done with that. And obviously it is a prerequisite and she may have to relearn it if she gets to calculus and other things. But we tend to treat those, and in school we treat them all as independent things that we're learning, where we could take a lot more advantage of some of the crossover. But it's like when you, and as a teacher, you probably had this, where the students get to school and maybe you've got giving them a test that day, and you are greeting them and you're talking to them and say, no, don't talk to me. I need to check the test right now while I still remember it. And that's a classic sign of not having learned something. I learned it for the test and then it's gone and it's irrelevant. So what is it, what are we doing for kids? How is that going to help them in the future? And we're looking at a future where education is going to have to change because we can no longer teach students the content of what they're going to have to know because we don't know what those jobs are going to be. Gone are the days when doctor, lawyer, fireman, business person, all those kinds of things. There's so many jobs even today. I look at my children and then I look at my granddaughters, so I have no idea what their career options are going to be. We simply can't define them. So all we can really do is prepare them to be good learners because they're going to have to learn those jobs and they're going to have to relearn them as things change, as technology changes and the world changes, which is doing so fast, it's hard to keep up.
And so what are those important skills then? What are cognitive skills? I think it's a good question to start with that.
Right. So cognitive skills are the basic mental processes that our brains use to take in, organize, store, retrieve, make sense of, and apply information from the outside world. And so that's what starts the learning process. These are things like attention. There are different types of attention, for example, sustained attention, selective attention. That's when we're able to just screen out distractions and focus on certain things. Our memory skills, visual processing, auditory processing, sensory integration so that we get visual and auditory information that makes sense all together. And then there's a special group of cognitive skills that are called executive functions. And there's a lot of attention being paid to executive functions today, but they're not as well understood as they need to be. So there are three core executive functions. One is working memory, which is our ability to hold information in our mind while we think about it. So think about when you're reading, you have to hold information from the beginning of the sentence to the end. That's working memory. The second is inhibitory control. And this is pretty much what it sounds like. It's your ability to stop yourself from doing something that you otherwise would do, like push the button on the latte machine 8 more times to try to get it to work, right? But you have to be able to stop yourself from doing that or stop yourself from punching someone in the face when you're mad at them, all those kinds of things. And that's the executive function that most educators are the most familiar with and parents because it's so obvious. And the third is cognitive flexibility. So it's how you change your mindset as the world around you changes or as you learn new information. So when you learn that first of all, that there is such a thing as a latte, and you decide that you want to become expert at it, you have to change a bunch of assumptions that your brain has made and the way that it's modeled the world about what coffee is. And all of a sudden you have to create a different framework for doing that. And our ability to do that in school is essential. In life, it's essential. Things don't always go the way that we expect them to. And I think that cognitive flexibility, I predict, is going to be one of the key skills that is going to determine workplace success in the future, because you're going to have to be able to adjust. You have to be able to adjust to different people, different methods, different approaches, and our ability to do that is really core. So those three executive functions, working memory, cognitive flexibility, and inhibitory control, are very predictive of academic success. They're predictive of how far you'll get in school, how much money you'll make, whether or not you're going to be healthy when you get older, what kind of a marriage you're going to have, and whether or not you're going to end up in jail. I mean, all of these sort of long-term outcomes that are measures of life success are really determined. So when we understand how central these executive functions are, and we know that we can help develop them and build them, then we are really giving a great gift to our children for their future.
And right from the get-go, let's say children are born even in the same household, 2 siblings, let's say, or 3 children, and I heard you talk about your own children, how they were all different learners, right? Everybody is born with specific capacity or tendencies. Is this fixed? That's what I want to know. Or we can still work how much, let's say, one child has from the beginning? Can we determine that? How can we work with this?
So cognitive skills are determined by a combination of genetics and experience. And it's not just one plus, it's sort of one times the other. So it's very complex, and I don't think anybody really completely understands that. So what we do know is that even when you have siblings, their experiences, their individual experiences are going to be different. So everybody has the ability to learn, but not everybody has the same developed capacity to learn. So these cognitive skills are like capacity. They're your bandwidth, the strength of these different skills can be different. We all have cognitive strengths and weaknesses. And these are affected by a lot of things, by our experience. There's a lot of research today that talks about the impact of poverty on cognitive development. You mentioned before trauma-informed care. Trauma has a big impact. Stress has a big impact. So all of these factors in very complex ways help to influence how these develop, and the richness of your environment, the confidence and the positive attitudes and things that you have all are also going to, certainly play a role. There's a lot of discussion these days about social emotional learning, and what the pandemic has made crystal clear is that children who are stressed can't learn, and they certainly don't learn as well. So this is a direct impact on both the development of those skills and then their ability to use them when they're in a learning situation. And for some kids, a learning situation is threatening, is something that it causes fear and stress and anxiety.
I know, right? So let's talk about this a little bit. I mean, a kid who has, let's say, some kind of traumatic events happening in his life, could be an ongoing parental conflict, for example. Let's take that into consideration. A father who drinks at night, yells at the mother, has constant conflict and even maybe interpersonal violence. And I mean, imagine that child now goes to school the next day or the next day. And of course, their performance is going to suffer. They're not going to sit still, pay attention, let alone learn, right? I mean, there is a huge impact how the environment and stress and trauma affect the kids' ability to learn. Unfortunately, it's not talked a lot about this, or we dismiss it. We assume that, okay, the child is out of that environment, of the home environment. Now they're in school. Okay, now they can focus and learn because they're no longer there. But it just doesn't work like that. There are residual effects, impact. I want you to speak about this a little more, so that the parents can understand that even at home, when they are too demanding, too criticizing, too shaming, it can add to the stress of the child, to the mental health of the child. A parent can be a good parent, but if they are demanding and the child has too many activities and a stressful life, I think parents need to be aware of that this is causing tremendous stress. And that's why your child is having issues at school, not because your kid is bad or they need to work harder or that they're lazy. So I want you to talk about the impact of stress and trauma on children's ability to perform and learn.
Absolutely. So there are a couple of things that are really important to understand. One is the impact of stress on cognitive functioning. We've all been in these kinds of things. If you think about some time when you were in a situation and somebody just said something awful to you or insulted you, and you freeze, right? That's what our bodies do. And we evolved so that we would be able to run away from the man-eating tiger or outwit them, right? To be able to save ourselves. But what happens when that happens is we go into fight or flight mode. So the chemicals in our brain basically tamp down the front part of our brain, their frontal lobes, which is where we think and reason and make cool, calm decisions. And they send all of the energy, all the oxygen out to our muscles and to our heart. And our heart rate goes up and we start to sweat and we get ready to go running away or to fight whatever that challenge is. And we think that situations like conversations with our parents or learning in a classroom shouldn't be that threatening, but for many kids it is. And it can be threatening simply because we don't understand the trauma that they bring into the situation. Just because you walk across the threshold of the classroom doesn't mean your body suddenly calms down. In fact, there may be more going on. There may be, peer pressures. There may be, I didn't have time to study, or I couldn't get my work done, and I just hope the teacher isn't going to call on me. And so recognizing as educators and as parents that that's all coming with them. And then our job is to understand it, not to say it's not important, or that it isn't having an impact. We have to understand that it's having the impact. Then we don't use it as an excuse, though. So because our job as educators is to educate. And so if we can make learning a safe place, make the classroom, make our relationships safe, and second of all, give kids the tools that they need to be resilient. Give them the breathing exercises, give them the space, give them the specific tools that allow them to calm down, to refocus, and to re-engage. That is going to be far more effective than talking to them about it, because what's going on is not, they can talk to themselves, but you're talking to them doesn't get to the heart of what's happening inside their bodies. The other thing you talked about was this idea that parents want and expect their children to be high achievers and to do well and to work hard. And that's good. That's actually really important for parents to have high expectations and to believe that their children can achieve. But they also have to understand, when going back to the cognitive skills, is that because we all have cognitive strengths and weaknesses, there can be a lot of reasons why kids may not do well or may struggle with learning that has nothing to do with being lazy or obstinate. Here's just a simple example. One important cognitive skill is processing speed. It's the speed with which our brains process information or respond to something that we experience. We had a parent who called us up very distraught one day because the school had told her, this is the mother, that they thought her daughter had oppositional defiant disorder. So that's a clinical term for a kid who just won't do anything, will negatively react. This child was a rule follower. She would do anything you asked her to. So the mother was going, how can this be? And as the school described what they were seeing, they would ask her to do something, and the child wouldn't respond right away because the child had to process. You're asking me to open my book. For some kids, it takes longer to figure out what exactly that means. And so that this child was processing and would be very willing to do that. But that's how we can sometimes perceive there being an issue that's not the issue at all. And so that's true of laziness. That's true of they're not listening to me. Sometimes, I hear parents say all the time, oh, they don't pay attention to me. Well, they may not be looking at you. They may not give you the signs that you are expecting about attention, but they may be paying attention, or they may be paying attention but have weaker working memory so that whatever you told them doesn't stick in their minds. So it's not their willingness to cooperate or to do it just evaporates, that the information and if you ask them to go get your dirty laundry, come down, put it in the hamper, and, get your spelling list and put it in your backpack so we can go to school. A lot of kids, by the time they get that first thing done, the rest of it's just gone. And that's because they aren't able to hold it in working memory. So that's a great example of a capacity. They have the ability, but haven't developed the capacity. And we can strengthen that through cognitive training.
Love that. But I want to say a couple of things. Yeah. About children listening. You need to know that. And I hear sometimes parents say, look me in the eye, or look at this woman in the eye, or the teacher, so that you're signaling as if you're listening. But you can listen without looking, right? So I think we have to take into consideration the individual differences of children and how they learn differently. and change this mentality that every child is, just because we're teaching something, not every child is going to learn and absorb the same way. It just doesn't work like that.
And you're exactly right in that, and sometimes it can be really cute. There's a picture that I used to make this point, which is a picture of cows standing in a field. And there's one cow standing sort of behind the other, so it looks almost like the cow has 5 legs, like the front cow has 5 legs. And there was a teacher once who had asked students what this was a picture of. And one of them said, they're twins, like conjoined twins. One of them said, it must be a cow from another country. The other one said, they came up with all of these explanations based on their personal experience. And, life is so interesting and rich when we can look at all these different perspectives and not say, oh, well, no, none of them is right, because they're all right in a sense. They all express what their individual ability to perceive and to understand things and what their experience has been.
Yeah, that's great. And there was another word you used, safety, which I think is so important. And I just want to highlight it. Unless the child feels safe within their body, within the environment, and within that relationship with the teacher, learning will not happen. Clearly, it will not happen. I think learning is a relational experience. And I see so many teachers who are not paying much attention to that element. They're just doing their function. And or even parents can sometimes fall into that category too. We're so exhausted. But creating that relational safety is what's going, especially for kids who do not have safety at home, who come from this extreme stress or traumatic environment. That teacher can be that other person who can provide that sense of safety so that the child will learn. But unfortunately, the emphasis we place in our education system is not the well-being or the safety of the child. It's unfortunately, it's just regurgitating of the information and the test scores and things like that. And we know very well, I can give a personal example. When I was 30 years old, I speak 5 languages, even 6, but 5 fluently, and I can read and write. I decided to take languages come very easily and naturally to me. So when I was 30, I said, you know what, I'm going to learn Spanish. And so I enrolled in a program with a friend, and the teacher was amazing. This teacher was so great. She had everything. We clicked, her personality, her teaching style. And I was progressing so well. And she said, wow, in 10 years, I never had an adult learner like you. And because of her, I was learning like significant and tremendous speed. Then, unfortunately, she had to move to Spain. And so they had, this learning center gave me another teacher. And this teacher was the complete opposite of this previous woman. And guess what happened to me? Well, I stuck with the program for a few months. I stopped doing homework. I became, quote unquote, lazy. I just hated this environment, this learning. It wasn't the same. And eventually I gave up because I just couldn't, because you had this amazing experience with the previous teacher, you know what it can be, right? And now you have this. So the teacher plays a huge role in creating the environment, but also that relational safety that is so vital for our children to learn and perform.
I think you're absolutely right about everything you just described. And as a teacher, you remember some of those relationships and some of those children. And we can't always connect with everybody. Our personalities are different, but what we can do is to listen, to pay attention, and to help make those situations more safe. One of the things that I've become really interested in is what I believe is the social importance of learning, so that learning, I'm pretty sure, is a very social activity. And it seems a little bit strange sometimes to say that, because we have to learn, each brain has to learn individually. And we can certainly think about, oh, I'm going to go and I'm going to close my bedroom door and I'm going to really study and I'm going to learn this stuff. But that ignores the why. That ignores the why I'm learning it and what I'm going to do to demonstrate that I learned it. And there's no way to do that other than in a relationship. And that is that feedback, when we do even cognitive training with our families, the key role of the coach. So a lot of the training is online. It's in a video game format, and you can do these exercises. But what we've learned over the years is that relationship with that coach, someone who's going to encourage you, who's going to help you, who's going to help you think of different strategies, that individual relationship and wanting to do it not just for somebody, but you talked about parents, and children do want to please their parents. They do want them to get that approval. They do want their attention, and sometimes they'll do pretty obnoxious things to get their attention if they're not getting it in the most constructive way.
I completely agree. I mean, even as an adult, my dad's opinion mattered for me. Even as an adult, a professional, I always wanted my father to be proud of me, my achievements. I wasn't doing it for him necessarily, but it meant a lot that, someone I love and someone who loves and cares for me, it's, you're not doing it for them. You're doing it for your life enrichment. But I think that's always, that there's nothing wrong with that. It's a very natural inclination, I think.
Right. And this very strong part of our motivation is we are social beings. We can't survive as most of us can't survive other than as part of a culture and a community and a society. And nor would we thrive if we, tried to do otherwise. So recognizing that and understanding, building on those social cues, at the same time also building our own self-confidence and self-esteem so that we don't always have to check with somebody else to see if we're doing the right thing or if we were able to accomplish something.
So are there any children who don't respond well to cognitive skills training?
It's very unusual for that to be the case. And when it happens, it's always because there is some kind of emotional issue that wasn't identified before that. So you might have a child who just won't engage. And usually that's some kind of emotional. There's a stressor, there's a drug problem, maybe, and maybe there's a depression or things like that. So there are a variety of mental health issues. In fact, every mental health issue has a cognitive aspect to it. And there's been a lot of research that some very recent research that basically calls it the C factor, that this cognitive impairment or cognitive issues come along with whatever it is, from bipolar disease to schizophrenia to depression, and even just mild symptoms like anxiety, that they have a cognitive impact. And so if those haven't been addressed, it may be very difficult for a child to engage in that kind of activity. But when they are, and when they're supported in doing it, then there's every ability to improve their cognitive, which then also helps to build their self-esteem. So when you go into a learning experience and you're confident you can do it, and you know that you may not get it right the first time, the whole concept of growth mindset is really important here, and it's something that really develops as a result of and with cognitive training, because you go in knowing. And knowing that maybe I didn't do it right the first time, but I'm going to learn it. I didn't make that heart in my latte the first time. But as the more I practiced it, the better I get. And pretty soon, I'm the world champion of creators of hearts and lattes, right?
Yeah, that's pretty good. So how can a parent who is listening figure out, in what area, what skill that their children are needing to improve? Like, what are some telltale signs of the 3 skills that you mentioned that could be misinterpreted as misbehavior or not listening or something else?
So there are a couple things. We have a cognitive rating scale that's free on our website. And I would strongly encourage parents to fill this out, to complete the rating scale. And it's for different ones. It's a little different for different ages. And what it does is ask them to look at activities, and that's everyday activities that you observe that are related to cognitive skills. So it can give you a good idea of whether there are areas that are weaker and what their strengths are. It can be very helpful to have both parents fill it out, because parents are involved with their children in different environments and different types of activities. So you may get additional insights from saying, oh, I don't see that. I see this. I see it in this particular situation. And then you can start to delve a little bit deeper into why that might be. So that's a really, really good first step. You might even have the child's teacher complete it and learning information from that. And then if there are concerns, then you would want to consider having sort of official, formal cognitive assessment. And there are a variety of different types of approaches to that. But that's a really good first step, because it can sensitize you to being aware that there are these underlying processes, and have you think about whether this is something that is really going to be standing in their way where you need to address it.
And who performs the cognitive assessment? Let's say a parent who is listening is concerned. They took that questionnaire. They saw that their child needs some help. Who do they go? Do they go to their pediatrician, to a specialist?
So there are a few different places to go. We include a cognitive assessment as part of our programs, and so that's certainly one option. We do it to understand a child's strengths, not to diagnose. So there are sort of 2 different things that you may be addressing. In terms of if you're concerned about ADHD or autism, or and really want to make sure that you have that diagnosis because you think medication or something like that might be in order, then you would go to a psychologist or a psychiatrist, or that's another learning specialist. If sometimes if the child is likely to be a candidate for special education, the school might provide a psychologist to do the assessment. So you can ask at school as well. That sometimes is an option.
And may I ask you to talk about a little more about this questionnaire, how lengthy it is, and would you be willing to read a couple of sentences or examples from it so that the listener can have an idea?
Yeah, absolutely. So it would generally take no more than about 10 to 15 minutes to complete. So it's pretty straightforward. So what the rating scale does is it has a statement, and then you would rate and rank your child significantly below average, average, above average, or significantly above average. So, just compare them to, and different parents may have different perception about what's average and things, and that's fine. But, just based on your experience. So here's one. In fact, listens carefully and maintains eye contact when being spoken to. So that is one example of one statement that relates to attention skills, but it's not the only one. Remembers to do things he or she was asked to do, or can remember the details of a story he or she just read. Those are examples of various aspects of memory. Can follow a map, does not make a lot of careless errors. So those are some of the statements that most parents, I think, will have a pretty good sense of how their child does because it relates to their everyday interactions.
Can a parent using stories or books by reading with the child and saying, let's retell the story, what happened in the story, can these kinds of activities help improve the working memory, for example? Once we identify that my child, needs a boost in working memory skills, how do we go about improving those skills? And can we use storytelling, for example, or are there any specific tools that parents need to, or programs need to use?
Yes. So there are certainly activities that you can engage in that will help develop these important cognitive skills and executive functions. The other side of that is that if there are programs, and the cognitive assessment training program that we do is an example of those that will drive significant cognitive growth in a very short period of time. So I sort of distinguish between I just want to raise my child to in an environment where they're doing activities where they're going to be naturally developing these, as opposed to there's a barrier here and I really need to do something that is more in depth and is a more impactful and resolving problems that I see. So but there are, and when you use the example of telling a story, it's always a great idea to take a story that they've read or a movie that you've watched together, a TV show that you've watched together. We always were worried about screen time, but some screen time can be okay, especially if you then take it and have a conversation about it. What do you remember? What do you think was the most important thing? What happened right before that? Why do you think that person did things? So asking questions at different level, we were really exploring not just details of what happened, but what caused them, how different people had different perspectives. So those, and that you can do in pretty much anywhere in life. You can do it at the grocery store. You can do it on your way to soccer practice. You can do it, as I said, watching TV together. So those are wonderful things to be doing. And we actually have, the other thing is we have a free ebook on our website that's called IQ plus EQ equals UQ. And it's basically a bunch of activities that families can do together to help develop these capacities. But if you're at a point where it's really standing in the way of a child progressing in school, and you're going to want to do something more than these kinds of activities and really seriously consider cognitive training.
Let's say I just learned about this as a parent, that there is such thing as cognitive skills training, and my child is a teenager. Is it too late to enroll my child, or will my child catch up and develop in the areas that she is lacking, or it's too late?
So the good part about our brains is that they have this property called plasticity, and the scientists refer to it as neuroplasticity. And the good news is that we have neuroplasticity from birth to when we die. So our brains can constantly change. It is easier when we're younger. And it's easier when we're 14 than when we're in our 20s. And it's easier when we're in 20s than in our 60s. However, we can change, and we have seen some remarkable results with teenagers. teenagers, of course, have to be bought in. They have to be willing to engage in it. And most kids find, with us at least, that the process is very engaging. It's fun. They have a strong relationship with their coach that they work with, and they really enjoy the process. However, you also have kids who say, I'm not going to do it, or I'm just not into it. I don't want that help. So with younger children, it's a little easier because they will generally do what mom and dad want them to do. When they're in their teens, we always start with, is this something your child is willing to do and is interested in doing? Do they want help? And they can want help for a lot of different reasons. It's not just about academics always, but sometimes it's sports. Every elite athlete does cognitive training. All the world-class quarterbacks and football, tennis players, they all do cognitive training because that's part of, being able to see things, being able to see the whole court or the whole field, being able to anticipate what the other person's going to be doing, that visual spatial kinds of things in tennis or hockey or, any of these things. So sometimes that's the motivation. Sometimes it's because they want to be a great musician or they want to be the best video game player. Well, we can train you, when your cognitive skills are stronger, you can be a better video game player, you can be a better athlete, you can be a better whatever it is that you want to be.
How about vice versa? Can playing video games make you better at cognitive skills? Or playing sports? Yeah.
And actually, so there's some activities that have been shown to actually have a positive impact on, there is some evidence that video games can help develop certain kinds of cognitive skills, but there's also evidence that they have a negative impact on them. So it's a little bit of a mixed story in terms of what the research is suggesting. What they don't do is combine these skills together, and they don't do it intentionally. So every video game is designed around gameplay and graphics and storyline, and the rest of it's incidental. Cognitive training, while we use something that looks like a video game, it incorporates clinical therapeutic techniques. So they're activities that were developed by a multidisciplinary group of clinicians to specifically develop these skills in a very integrated way so that they work together. Our brain is a very systemic organ, so it has to, we work the way that the brain works. Video games don't necessarily do that.
Yeah, because sometimes you hear parents saying that, yeah, my child is becoming, better at strategic thinking because they're playing video games. They want to see positives in that. So in your program, let's say someone brings their child, you do the assessment first, naturally, right? And then they go through the program. How long does it take? Are they doing it in your premises? Is this something they do it at home? So I want to know more a little bit about your program. And do you assess them afterwards and compare results? And can you give me a couple of examples of interesting stories, or maybe recent stories, post-pandemic, of success stories?
Sure. So yeah, there were a lot of questions. Let's see how good my working memory is. If I can hang on to them and then respond to them in the right sequence too. So we do start with the cognitive assessment, and we do it as a baseline so that we see where they're starting. We also do it as the basis for the development of a personalized learning plan. So all of our clients get personalized learning strategies that are key to their cognitive strengths and weaknesses. So this also helps them. A simple example is most of us have stronger either verbal memory or visual memory, stronger memory for visual information or for language-based information. Well, if you think about how teachers tend to give you, assign you to learn vocabulary words. They say, and maybe your Spanish teacher probably did, the good Spanish teacher didn't do it this way necessarily, but they will say, write the word, write the definition of the word, write the word in a sentence. Well, that's fine for a child who has stronger verbal memory, because they process things and take them in, and it will remember them, be able to retrieve it based on language-based information. But if you have a child that has much stronger visual memory than verbal memory, all of that writing is just a bunch of words and it doesn't stick. And so what you would want them to do is to draw a picture. You would create an image, something, and use flashcards or something like that with the image associated with the word. And they will learn that much faster. So we can give our children a lot of tools to help them be a lot more efficient with their studying. The cognitive training is typically for 12 to 14 weeks. So in a time frame of 3 months or so, we can have a significant impact. And our research has shown that over and over again. And then we do the assessment again at the end so that we can measure growth. And we do that both with input from the parents as well as the formal cognitive assessment that we do. So we see the growth in terms of improvements in usually a variety and usually on average across all of the cognitive skills that we measure. And then we also see, what parents and students themselves reflect, what they see and what the changes that they recognize. The most common thing the first thing that we typically will hear from parents is, my child has stronger self-confidence. They have greater self-esteem because they know they can take what they've learned and these newly developed skills. It's like, if you go to training, physical training, and then you show up to play your tennis game, you're going to feel more confident that you can do all those activities. So the same is true for learning. And then self-confidence is something that typically is one of the first things. But I was talking to a parent the other day whose child is getting, they're about 10 weeks into their cognitive training, and we've recommended that they go just a little bit longer than the 12 weeks, because every individual is different. And so we always work very closely with the parents to figure out what the best program for that individual child is. And the mom said, so before the holidays, her son would come home, and we had recommended that they use a visual timer to help him pace himself, not to create pressure. You don't have to finish it with the timer, but just something for him to refer to so that he can track how time is elapsing, because he had very slow processing speed and would take him forever to do his work. She said he came home yesterday, and she said usually we would have to reset the timer and maybe reset it again. It would take him just a really long time to get his work done. Well, he'd come home the day before, after the holiday, and he's been doing his cognitive training, and he sat down and he got his assignment done before the timer went off the first time. So it's hard to sort of explain, because every child is different, and how they experience it and how it shows up can be very different. But usually after 7 or 8 weeks, parents and kids are starting to notice something. Maybe that something seems a little easier. Maybe that they, remembered the first 2 instructions you gave them instead of just the first. That's the kind of thing. We had one young lady who said, I remember where I put my hairbrush. Because she could visualize it, before she couldn't create that visual memory of where to do it. So those are some examples.
Wow, pretty interesting. And it is with over time, is there a decline in the skills that they gained, or the changes that a child acquires during the program are lasting?
So they're lasting. And if you think about our brains and how they work, we're working to get these skills to the level where they're just automatic. They're there. And if you think about the things in your life that you've gotten to that level, like walking, tying your shoes, driving a car, how often do you get in your car and you get to wherever you're going, the grocery store, whatever it is, and you have no idea how you got there because your brain has taken over. It's automatic. And so as long as you're in an environment where you're using them, if you, have somebody who goes and sits around and does nothing but video games or sits on the couch and watches TV for 6 months, you might see some decline. But basically, those skills are there. And sometimes they even continue to develop at a faster rate, even though they're not actually engaged in the program. But they are sustained or continue to develop at an accelerated rate.
Can adults take advantage of this program?
Yes, indeed. We've worked with a lot of adults. We've worked with college students. We've worked with console operators in an oil refinery. We've worked with, anecdotally with a lot of other adults who've used the program and find it easier to retain what they read, find it easier to transfer financial information, to keep track of them and be more organized in their lives. Those are some of the things that adults can experience.
And the emotion regulation part, I think, would be a good one for parents, right? That second category of skills, the inhibitory
control.
Yes, inhibitory control. I think that's a good one. This is pretty fascinating. I'm so interested in doing the program myself. I love these kinds of things.
Well, if you would like to take the mind print assessment and to have your daughter take the mind print assessment, I'd be happy to arrange for you to do that. And then I'll go over it with you and we can talk about what that is. And if you'd like to have an account in Brainware after you do that, then I'll be happy to set you up with that too. And you can have your own hands-on experience with it.
Oh my goodness. Now I'm nervous. I would like to know where my strengths are, what my weaknesses are, but yeah.
Well, I'm not concerned about what you're going to find because you didn't learn all those languages by not having some strong cognitive skills. So I think, we can guess at it, but it's always interesting to learn. And as successful adults, we've learned to compensate for those skills that are not as strong. But when we understand them, then we can be even more targeted about how we do. And not just about, a lot of education tends to focus on what kids can't do or what people can't do rather than what we can do. And when we understand what our strengths are and really can work those, it's just very, very empowering. So if you'd like to do that, is that something you'd like to do or?
Yeah, I'm giving my word on the podcast. Definitely. I would like to do it. I want to find.
We'll come back and do another podcast and talk about.
You know what? That's not a bad idea. And then, yeah, I think that's a deal, Betsy.
All right.
I'm all for it. Yeah. I'm interested. I'm almost 50, so I want to maintain my cognitive sharpness as I age.
Well, and we can have a whole conversation about that. We probably don't have time, but and what is your daughter's name?
Ella.
And actually, we probably don't want to record this. All I need is her birth date.
Yeah.
So maybe do you want to email that to me or something? Okay.
Yeah.
And then I'll set her up. But
wow. Hopefully she will be eager to do it. Yeah. I have to. How do you sell the idea to your kid that you want them to do the testing first, obviously, and then engage in the program?
So with her, I would just start with taking the assessment. It's about an hour. It's online. It's not a reading test. It's not a math test. It's simply a bunch of activities that allow us to understand how she learns best.
Mm.
When we have that information, we can help her understand how she learns best. We can give her strategies to make the most of her study time so she can spend less time studying and more time doing the things she likes to do.
That would be great. Yeah. Yeah, I'm definitely going to do it. Thank you. I appreciate that. Is there anything else that you want to add to today's conversation? Something that you wanted to really convey a message that I didn't ask?
I think the most important thing for parents to understand is that cognitive skills are key to learning. And then if learning's not taking place, it doesn't really matter what teaching is taking place, that we need to keep focusing on learning. And when we can, that even if for kids who are struggling with certain aspects of learning, we can give them a lot of support and help that most people aren't aware of and most schools aren't aware of. And so it's really trying to help empower and inform parents that they can have a big impact on this. And that's really what I think the primary takeaway needs to be.
Yeah, thank you so much, Betsy. This was a pleasure speaking with you. I learned a lot, and I can't wait to take the assessment and maybe go through the program. I'm really happy we connected, and I hope the listeners are interested in developing their children's cognitive skills, and they will no longer label their children lazy, bad, or get into arguments over homework. And I hope one day to see the education system, change in ways that is beneficial, is trauma informed, and is learning based. Not
well, the more parents understand about this, the more likely it is that the education system itself will start to realize and change it. So, and there's nobody that cares for a child more than a parent.
True. Thank you so much. That concludes today's conversation, my dear listener, and I hope you enjoyed it. What's your biggest takeaway? Did you find it useful? I would love to hear from you. I always welcome your feedback, comments, and questions. Send me a note to the email info@authenticparenting.com. Call the number 732-763-2576 and leave a voicemail. And for international listeners, use the free SpeakPipe tool on the contact page of my website, authenticparenting.com/contact. If you want to connect with your fellow listeners from around the world, engage in meaningful conversations about the podcast, get support and answers to your parenting questions, join the Authentic Parenting community on Facebook, a private support group for parents like you. In an ongoing basis, bi-monthly, I offer free support calls for the members of that community. If you enjoy the podcast, you can help us out by leaving a review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to the show. Your ratings and reviews help us get more visibility. Do you love the podcast and find it helpful? Show your support by becoming a patron on patreon.com. With a small monthly contribution, you can make a big difference. To learn more and choose a level of support, go to patreon.com/authentic parenting. Again, patreon.com/authentic parenting. Join other existing members who believe and support the work of authentic parenting. You can find the show and follow it wherever podcasts are played. Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music, Pandora, and elsewhere. And finally, if you want to know what I'm up to in my private life, see behind the scenes of podcasting, get some inspiration, and simply stay connected, follow me on Instagram, the only social media platform that I use and somewhat enjoy. And as always, connect to the present moment, to yourself and your children. Until next week, I am Anna Seewald. Thank you so much for listening.